Hello from Lake Village, Arkansas. It's me, the student witch, long time no see. This is the beautiful full moon above the lake for which Lake Village, Arkansas is named. I have been living and working, well, not really living, but I've been working in a small town called Eudora, Arkansas. Population around 2,500 people. I've been teaching high school and middle school students about the history of colonialism, the history of race, the history of immigration, the different historical events that made the New World that we know today. And it has been quite an experience. This is my first time spending this much time in the Mississippi Delta. I'm learning about Delta culture, Delta history, and this is the eve of the summer, summer solstice, and I have the privilege of staring up at this beautiful full moon here in the Mississippi Delta in Arkansas by the lake, and I will talk to you guys more about my experience. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after that. And I'll have this video up probably when I'm already back in Georgia. I'll give you a second to just stare into the beauty of this solstice full moon. Many blessings. I just realized that this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see this full moon on the summer solstice here in the northern hemisphere happened in the Mississippi Delta, a place that's now very special and dear to my heart. It's an honor to have seen this moon here. Drive to work every morning. A whole lot of nothing. Hi, so I'm sitting here on a porch swing on a beautiful porch, as you can see, at the house where I'm staying here, and as you can also see, I'm doing some work. I'm writing my last paper that hopefully I'll ever have to write for a class. 5 years of graduate level coursework, and I'm almost done. So this is actually an incomplete. And this is just me rambling so I can record my time here and share it with you guys, but also have it on YouTube so I remember what I was doing June 2016 at this very special place here in Arkansas in the Mississippi Delta. So I'm writing a paper about a travel narrative that was written by a Chilean author, so it's nonfiction. She is of Palestinian descent. And actually the largest Palestinian group of people to live outside of the Middle East actually lives in Chile. So I'm basically approaching, there's trucks with boats and stuff driving by because the lake is right across the street. My approach for this paper is being guided by the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. And if you haven't heard of him, he was a Lithuanian Jew during World War II. He did not end up in a concentration camp, but his wife and daughter had to hide from the Nazis, and he actually he became a nationalized French citizen, and he fought for France during World War II, and he was a German POW for a while. So through this whole experience, he, instead of developing a philosophy of hate, he actually developed a philosophy of love and ethics. He argued for the primacy of ethics. He actually argued that ethics precedes philosophy. It precedes ontology. It precedes the use of language to name and describe the world. He actually thought that the encounter of the self with the other the encounter with the face of the other in its nakedness, in its vulnerability, was an encounter of responsibility, so that we all have in our encounters with other people responsibility over the well-being and ultimately over the life of the other person. So yeah, he critiqued people like Heidegger and other philosophers under whom he studied, and their emphasis on ontology and their emphasis on epistemology. And he basically was saying, it's not what we know or how do we know what we know, it's what we do with what we know. And this really is in line with the direction that I would like to take my research in. And I'm just fascinated by how he basically says ethics and our ethical responsibility for each other, over the well-being of each other, precedes or comes before philosophy or even comes before language. So yeah, that's what I'm writing about right now. And I'm just a few pages away from being done with this fucking paper, finally! It's been hanging over my head for a year, and I'm just so ready to be done with it because I'm stressed out about, you know, teaching these high school and middle school kids down here and making sure that I make the last week and a half of their classes as best as I can. And I'll be recording more about that later on this week. Okay, bye! We're here in Arkansas in a field, or a grove of trees that's surrounded by a field of, I don't know if those are cotton plants or soybeans, but basically we're here because this is all that remains of one of the Japanese internment camps or concentration camps that the US government built during World War II to discriminate against Japanese Americans. This is all that's left. All the barracks and things were plowed over and turned into fields. So now there's this grave and a few other graves. And that's it. And that's what's left of history. So this is the lake that's right across the street from the house that I'm staying in here in Arkansas, Lake Village, Arkansas. I don't remember the name of the lake, but I also know that it's one of the longest, how they call it, horn-shaped lakes in the United States, I think. It used to be part of the Mississippi River, but then it was blocked off by sediment and it became a lake. And it's gorgeous. So I'm standing on the dock right now, and I just had to share another little piece of Arkansas in the Delta. Hey YouTube, it's me, Student Witch again. Thank you for, oh, I have my chemically bug spray, but you need it down here. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful day out on the lake. It's the evening. I've been showing you guys some little clips of Arkansas, of the Delta region of Arkansas, where I've been staying and working since June 1st or 2nd. I hope you saw that bird fly by, that was cool. This is a very rural region of the country in general. The town I'm working at only has about 2,500 people that live in it, and it's an aging population as more and more young people kind of move out and go to places like Little Rock or over in Mississippi or Yeah. So it's interesting spending time in this tiny town. It's interesting, but it's also familiar because in Kentucky, when I was a little kid, between the ages of like 5 and 10, I lived in a small town of about 2,700 people. Um, so it's not new to me to be in a really rural, small place or a small town kind of place, but the difference is the town I grew up in, Kentucky, was mostly white. Um, Here, I think 88% of the town is black. And there's a growing Mexican American population. So all of the students that I'm teaching at the cultural center in this town, all of them are either, well, about 60% are African American and another 40% are Mexican American, and I've actually been teaching them and working with them on a lot of African American literature and theory, a lot of Caribbean literature, and Mexican American and Chicano literature. And like, I can't describe, or I can't really put it in words, but when these kids realize that they're learning the history that's not taught in schools because it's the history of people of color. You know, oddly enough, it's being taught by a white person. But when they realize that they're learning this history, the history that's usually omitted or neglected or outright banned, and they realize that it's their history, you know, it's just so magical to see those sparks in their eyes and just see them feel more empowered, being able to talk about a history that involves them, a history that reflects them and their experiences. Like yesterday, my students and I were talking about Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands La Frontera, which in Latino theory and Chicano theory is a fundamental text. It's very well known, very well read. But outside of that, not many people know about it. And part of the reason is because it's a banned book. In 2012, the Tucson Unified School System in Arizona actually banned that book. And they banned it as part of a greater effort to eliminate the Mexican American Studies program. So these Mexican American high school students, or high school teachers out in Arizona, started the Mexican American Studies program, and it was an optional class for the Mexican American or Chicano students so that they can learn about their history and think critically about history. And they've shown that these kids enrolled in these programs went from like being borderline, you know, about to fail high school to excelling and succeeding and kicking ass and taking names. Well, the problem is when you think critically about history out loud, you know, when you're talking about it and thinking critically about it, it can put a lot of white people, or it made a lot of white people feel uncomfortable because of white nativism. And white nativism is a concept that my students and I have talked about. We talked about manifest destiny. We've talked very openly about race. And so when I was telling them the story of how this book got banned out in Arizona, I tied it into the idea of white nativism. This idea that white Americans have more of a right to be here than anybody else, even though we ourselves are a product of colonialism. So anyway, so a lot of white politicians and school board members in Arizona got the governor involved, and at the time it was a white woman, and they dismantled and banned the Mexican American Studies program because these kids were talking openly about how the United States took over about half of Mexico's territory in the Mexican American War in the 1800s. They were thinking critically about race, thinking critically about prejudice against immigrants, prejudice against Mexican Americans specifically, and if so, the white school board and the white politicians shut it down. So in our discussion in class yesterday, when I told them this story and made them realize that they were reading a banned book, we talked about the power of history and the power of knowledge. And a couple of my students made some really awesome connections. One student compared Ansaldúa to W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of the double consciousness, so this idea of not fitting in, of not feeling that you belong because you're constantly aware of, you know, the judgment and prejudice from white people again, who believe that they have more of a right to be here than anybody else. Another student, when we've already talked about race as a social construction, so another student made the connection of how the border can be a social construction, which was an awesome connection, and she's actually going to talk about the US-Mexican border as a social construction for her paper that she's going to start writing for my class tomorrow. So I guess my greater point is the power of history and the power of knowledge, and just helping these kids just have access to this knowledge, because really they're putting in all the work, and they're also bringing themselves and their experiences to the table. Like I said, 60% of my students are black, 40% are Mexican American. They all grow up poor in the rural South, in the Mississippi Delta, which has a very particular history about like racism and slavery and poverty. So, and a whole other sorts of things. So for these kids, I don't really feel so much like I'm teaching them. I'm just giving them access. You know, I'm just that bridge. Or I'm helping them construct that bridge between themselves and their history. Because like one of my students said the other day when we were talking about this Mexican American author, and this was a black student, and she said, you know, in school we only talk about black history in February, and really we only talk about one person, Martin Luther King, and we don't mention Mexican history at all in school. You know, she came up with that and made that connection all on her own, and that was like a whoo power moment for me as a teacher, but also it was so enlightening to see her make those connections between herself and her classmates, but also the greater connection of how we talk about history, the types of history, or the history of certain groups being privileged over the history of others. And it's just been so wonderful for me to just help them build that bridge and help them just have access to this history and have access to this type of literature, a literature that reflects their own experience. It's been so empowering for them and so eye-opening for me, you know, because I am a white person teaching this type of literature. I think one of the greatest lessons I've gotten from this experience, you know, as a white person, coming from outside, coming from the privileged environment of academia and an Ivy League school, but also coming from my own personal background in rural Kentucky as a first-generation college student in my family. For me, coming from the outside and getting a taste, just a very small taste of these kids' everyday lives, and providing them access to history and literature that they can connect with. Sorry, a bird just dove in to the lake and caught something. The greatest lesson has been how we all can participate in this conversation. We all can participate in this conversation, right? And actually, it's the responsibility of white people to learn this history and to take ownership over what our ancestors did. And by taking ownership over what our ancestors did, but also being respectful and knowing when to listen, when to just listen, but also when to talk, you know? I think my experience here has just proven to me, at least, that this type of cross-cultural, cross-racial, cross-generational conversation is necessary and possible. So yeah, these conversations can happen. They're necessary. And it's been so just magical for me to see my students' growth, for me to see how they've connected with this history that we've been talking about, how they're beginning to become aware of their power. And I'm just so excited to see how far they can go. So yeah, this might be the only opportunity I have to sit down and have a chat, because unfortunately I'm a week from Saturday, so on July 2nd I'm driving back to Georgia, and the sad thing is I might not ever see these kids again. I don't know if I'm ever going to have time to come back to this part of Arkansas. But I am going to give them my email address, I'm going to give them my phone number, I'm going to invite them to add me on Facebook. I want to see where these kids go, because most of these kids, we have a few who are about to enter high school, and we have a few who are in 10th grade or 11th grade. So here in the next few years, they're going to be going to college, hopefully. I mean, that's the mission of this program, is to give them a taste of what a college level course is like, right? In addition to ACT prep and having access to us as people who have been through college, so that they can ask us questions, they can ask us for recommendation letters, which I will happily write for each and every one of them. So I'm just so curious to see how far these kids go, because they're all brilliant, and they all deserve such a wonderful life, and I think, you know, they're gonna work hard and they're gonna get that life. I really do. So I will stay in contact with them, but like I said, I don't know if I'll ever be able to see them again. And I'm leaving here soon, in about a little over a week. And I've been here for about a month, so it's just flown by. It's been one of the most challenging experiences because I've never taught high school students before, but also probably the most rewarding experience I've ever had in the classroom, both as a teacher and as a student myself. At the university where I study in Massachusetts, I often feel very frustrated because it's an Ivy League school, and most of the people there come from very wealthy, well-to-do kind of backgrounds, and a lot of them are just completely oblivious about how the rest of the 99% of the world lives. And so, even though in a lot of my classes we talk about race, we talk about oppression, we talk about the history that is suppressed and oppressed, the history of the oppressed, colonial history, we talk about these very important topics, but I'm always aware of the fact that we're talking about it in a privileged space where very few people have access to, you know, a classroom in an Ivy League institution. So now I finally feel like I'm talking about these things and teaching these things and building bridges and helping these kids have access to these very important ideas and historical events and literature, not in a privileged space, actually in the opposite of a privileged space. So that has been like so empowering for me, Like, it's been soul cleansing. Like, I needed to get the hell out of Massachusetts for a while. I needed to be, like, with real people. Not academics, you know, academics who talk about oppression and stuff, but then they turn around and say, like, sexist or racist bullshit, you know? It's been soul cleansing, and I'm really gonna miss it here. I really am. I'll try my best to come back down here. Music. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So, yeah. I'm sure I'm gonna talk about this in future videos, especially when I'm back in Georgia and when I'm processing this experience, because it's gonna be a lot to process. But for now, I think I've shown you quite a bit of Eudora and Lake Village, Arkansas. And so the next time you see me, I'll be back in Georgia. Okay, before I drop my phone into this lake. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. This student witch who has been a teacher for the past few weeks and who's really learned what it means to be a teacher. So, until next time, bye.